How's it going, guys? John the Basic Expert here. I wanted to record a video talking about what I think the OSR is, and I think in order to do that, we need to kind of delve into some history. Now, I'm doing this video partly because a couple weeks back I did a stream talking about Ben Milton from Questing Beast and sort of critiquing his video that he made where he was talking about what is the OSR, and he explicitly says at the start of the video that he doesn't care about the rules, at least for the context of his video. And thinking about this for, a week or two now, I think that's the fundamental mistake that he made, in my opinion, that I disagree with, because I think the rules matter. And I think the rules matter because historically, that's what the OSR was all about, was about the rules, right? People in the mid-2000s, 3rd edition and 3.5 was all the rage, but there was a certain contingent of people that were not interested in playing that, right? But maybe they didn't have access to the rules anymore. A lot of older gamers sometimes, I have friends that are older than me, that are older gamers that are like, yeah, at one point in my 20s, I sold my collection, and then I was slowly trying to buy my collection back and rebuild it, but, you never get to what you had before, and I really regret selling my old games. Or there were younger people, people like myself, who were interested in the old games, but we weren't there, and, we're not, at the time, in the mid-2000s, we're not willing to pay, many people are not willing to pay collector prices for a full set of the first edition D&D core rulebooks for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, or for a BX box set, or for the Rule Cyclopedia, or for all the box sets for BECME, or for an original set of the 3 LBBs, which, have always been fairly expensive. So, people decided, Stuart Marshall is one. I have Osric here, which is one of the first clones, and one of the other first clones was Basic Fantasy. And these games were explicitly created because they wanted rules, old school rules. Matt Finch says the following in Osric. This document represents a compilation of rules for old school style fantasy gaming. The book is intended to reproduce underlying rules used in the late 1970s to early 1980s, which, being rules, are not subject to copyright, without using any of the copyrighted, quote, artistic presentation originally used to convey those rules. In creating this new artistic presentation, we have made use of the system reference document provided by Wizards of the Coast, WotC. The reason for going back to square one and restating the underlying rules is simple. It allows old-school publishers, both commercial and fans, to reference the rules set forth in this document without making reference to any protected trademark. This document is trademarked, but the use of the trademark is permitted under the terms of the Osric Open License, see below. By using this document in tandem with the Open Gaming License, which, obviously we've learned is poison now, OGL of WotC, a publisher should be able to create products for old-school fantasy gaming and clearly refer to this particular rule set without violating the terms of the OGL. Thus, in many ways, this entire book is nothing more than a tool for old-school writers, a stepping stone to put the original, non-copyrightable portion of the old-school rules into an open license as permitted by law. Great pains have been taken to ensure that we have used none of the original artistic presentation. We have the greatest possible respect for the authors who originally created these games. So, the goal here, as stated, is we want to give you a rule set that you can write adventures for, that you can reference. The rules mattered. I think this is why, again, I think like if we look at the origin of the OSR and some of its earliest games, we can see that the rules mattered. They were fundamental to understanding, to the start of the old school Renaissance. Let's read from Basic Fantasy just at the start of the introduction here. Chris Gonerman says, the Basic Fantasy role-playing game is a rules-light game system based on the D20 SRD version 3.5, but heavily rewritten with inspiration from early role-playing game systems. It is intended for those who are fans of old-school game mechanics. Basic Fantasy RPG is simple enough for children and perhaps 2nd or 3rd grade to play, yet still has enough depth for adults as well. And I've heard Gonerman say things like, he was playing games at the time, and he's like, I just wanted a rule set that was a little more simple. And so we can see here that rules mattered at the start of the OSR. These are two of the earliest clones that were made. Osric obviously trying to riff on and clone 1st edition, and Basic Fantasy cloning BX rule set. It's one of the first BX clones. And we have other games like Labyrinth Lord, again, Swords and Wizardry. These are all have that same fundamental mission, either to get the old school rules into the hands of gamers or to allow other gamers and publishers to publish adventures and material to keep old school content for these old school systems alive. So the rules mattered back then to the OSR. Now, I'm not saying that Rule 0 wasn't a thing, but I'm just saying that people still cared about the sort of vibe and aesthetics that the rules produced. They were the whole reason that the OSR started. So we can't, I think this was Ben's first fundamental mistake, is trying to divorce the rules from style of play. I think style of play for these people is informed by what the rules say. Whether they homebrewed them or not is irrelevant. The people that were interested, they were looking at 3.5 and were like, I'm not interested in that. I want to play 1E, so I'm going to get Osric because I can't pay I don't want to pay collector prices for 1E. And I think that ultimately this mission of the OSR was successful because it forced the hand of WotC. Now you can get print-on-demand books for first edition or second edition D&D. You can get PDFs of the 3 LBBs in 1974 D&D. You can get various adventures and modules from the TSR era, going back from 0E all the way up to second edition. Almost anything to your heart's content is available, at least in PDF, on DriveThruRPG. And so I think that ultimately this forced the hand of WotC because they saw people buying these things and going, hey, we want a piece of that pie. And so the initial mission of the OSR was successful. And I think this also shows really what the OSR is. The OSR, I guess at the heart of it, as much as maybe even I myself may want to deny this, is about old school D&D. It is about old school TSR D&D. 0E, BX, Holmes Blue Book, BECME, Rule Cyclopedia, first edition, second edition. It's about these games from the TSR era that are all roughly compatible with each other, though in lots of respects, different games. I think what Ben did in his video, like he should have titled his video maybe something like story gaming versus sandbox gaming, because again, my whole point of my stream that I tried to point out was all the markers that he pinpointed are things that could be in almost any game. They're not exclusive to the OSR. They were maybe instantiated by the OSR, but they're not exclusive to the OSR. And I think one marker that I was trying to think about this because someone was pressing me about this on X, and I was trying to think, is there one marker that we can look in the rules and see that this is the one key marker that's missing, that it doesn't really occur today, but is the marker maybe for what is old school play, and it comes out of that 70s and 80s milieu. And I would say that that's club play. I would add club play to Ben's list, and I don't know if that would do the job of necessarily making the OSR style of play more complete, but I think it would do a better job at the very least of making it a slightly more holistic and but still specific set of identifiers of what is old school play. And why would I say that? Well, from the very start, 0E, Dungeons & Dragons, says that it's a game for up to 50 people and a referee. And we see that timekeeping is extremely important in 1E. 1 week of game time equals 1 week of actual time in real life. And this is carried on over into AD&D First Edition. And this appears in other TSR games, and other games of the era have some sort of link between the game calendar and the real world calendar. Pendragon did this. I think RuneQuest did this still. There were many games that were leaning into this concept of linking the real world calendar to the game calendar. And this was just a method of simple timekeeping, because the assumption was that you have multiple players, maybe not 50, but maybe not the traditional sense either of up to 8 players playing the same character every time. Maybe you even have 8 players, but they're playing many different characters in these campaigns, all with different motivations, right? They have a stable of characters. AD&D First Edition talks about this. And so there were people that were using, I think, this method. Maybe, obviously not everyone. We hear constantly from people that Gary didn't play that way. But I think that club play is important because club play comes out of the Napoleonics. It comes out of the Tony Bath method of gaming as well, of war games, right? Where you have tons of people, all with motives, tons of players in a club playing in the same campaign, sometimes against each other, sometimes with each other and in alliance with each other. But it's a very player-driven game, and I think this is where Ben's video gets some things right in regards to the sandbox style of game. You need that to run this sort of 50-man massive war game campaign. And since D&D tells you this, and I think even in 0E and AD&D, you see the number of appearing from monsters, some of them in like the hundreds. You know, your small little adventuring party isn't meant to handle that, but obviously a big army can, and players, I think, are expected to start forming armies, marching across the landscape, conquering layers and monsters, but also each other. And I think this is a key sort of, I don't know if it completes the OSR style of play necessarily, the old school style of play as the rules inform them, because not even OSR people play this way. But I think it might help to identify the rules into a specific era of the 70s and 80s, where this was far more frequently than it even is now. And I have to give credit to the bros, because I think the BroSR is the only group of people I hear about that are really trying to push for this sort of club style play. And I think that they're on the right track, because we have tools today that make this style of play more possible than it ever was before. You can have a guilded server, you can have a Discord server, you have online tables. And so, you know, in real life, like, I don't know 50 people that I want to game with, but I can make a game, I could make a server online. I have my guilded server with 300 something people on it. I could easily get 50 people from that server if I wanted to, and start like a club style game going, right? And this is totally possible. And so it's easier than ever before. And so we can kind of look at these rules and experience the game, I think, as the rules sort of speak to us and intend us to experience them. And I think that's really neat and interesting. And I think that makes it definitely unique compared to what would be a quote unquote modern game that not many modern games tell you to do, or, you know, they stick to this sort of what's become the conventional style of play of a small group of adventurers together. And this brings me to, I think, my final point, because I think that other games sort of come to that. Like Traveler mentions having many players as well. It has this marker on it of being a war game coming out of the 70s milieu of, you know, campaign club play. And I think that that's important, but obviously Traveler isn't a game that is exactly like D&D. It's antithetical to it in a lot of respects. There's no levels, there's no spells, there's no magic, it's sci-fi, but it still has the same heart and spirit in a lot of respects, and it's very much present in the rules themselves in regards to this concept of club play. So what do we do with that? And so that's why I sort of, a while back, this is when it got me thinking, because I think I've misspoken on this point. And that was that, like, I was misspoken, said recently that OSR games should include games like Traveler or things like that. And maybe that's not the case, because when we look at I'm being anachronistic and incorrect there, I think, and I'll own up to my mistake. Because when we look at the history, Traveler had nothing to do with getting this rolling. Or Basic Fantasy, or any of these clones. The OSR started with TSR D&D rules. We have to acknowledge that historical fact, and that for a long time, that's what the OSR was, and it's only until recently that people have tried to change it. And so I've tried to think of, like, is there a term that we can give, like neoclassical gaming or something like that, or just old school gaming, that's sort of an umbrella of games from the 70s and 80s that sort of all fit in this same context, but they have different rule sets. They have different ways of adjudicating and resolving actions, attacks, and skill checks, all of these sorts of things. They have different ways of doing that. And I don't know what you guys think about that. I don't have a very good term for that, but I do think that there's something there to that, because D&D may be the first, but Traveler and RuneQuest and Harn and a lot of these games, they come out of a lot of the same context that D&D first originally came out of, which is wargaming and Napoleonics and club play. And I think that I just think that that's an important marker there. And that era of the 70s and 80s is really important in sort of a clear sort of vision of what old school, I guess, gaming in general is. But that's just what I think. I just think that, not that Ben's list was necessarily wrong. Again, I think his video was maybe just in his sort of framing of it all was just misguided in saying that it's OSR versus modern play, when maybe it should have been sandbox versus story game, which I 100% agree with his perspective on that. I prefer the sandbox game over the high prep story game. But I don't think that those things are special. But again, I think the one thing that might be special is the club play, because you can still plug that into versus the story high prep game. When you have 50 players in a campaign, I'm sorry, there's no possible way for you to prep, I think, some sort of epic storyline. You have to put it into the hands of players and let them push the adventure and the story and the world along. And you can interject your own things as a referee as well, of course, but you're not going to be able to prep like you would for a sort of interactive novel that you would do for like 6 to 8 players, right? It's just not feasible. So I think it allows Ben's list of these things to be a little bit more complete in comparison to the modern game. Now that the old school rules are available, the OSR just can't give up and die. Its original mission has been accomplished, but people are so entrenched in it, they can't just, and I don't think it necessarily should, just give it up, right? But we have to find a new reason, a new way. And maybe it is looking back to the roots of the OSR, right? Maybe we do need more adventure modules. Maybe we do need more campaign settings. Maybe we don't need to clone BX again. Maybe we do need some interesting sort of classes, maybe, that fit into various editions. That people do this all the time with 5th edition, for example. Why can't the OSR be more of the same? Why do we need BX clone number 9642, right? So that's going to do it for this video, guys. Appreciate you guys watching. If you're interested in this kind of content, like, subscribe, share the video. If you want to support the channel, you can do so right here on YouTube as a channel member, or on my Guilded server, or on Patreon. And, check out my Kickstarter for Wight-Box, which is a 0E plus chainmail clone again, as I mentioned. Link is down below. Check that out for the pre-launch, or if it's already going live by the time you're watching this, consider backing it if it looks interesting to you. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate you watching and taking the time to listen to me blabber on about the OSR old school games and sort of my own opinion on that. So until the next video, guys, I'll talk to you later. Peace out.